How's it going, everybody? Welcome into the Skyline Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jack Hartman, joined as always by my good buddy out there on the West Coast, Nick Normand. Nick, how you doing today, man?
Doing well, doing well. I feel like we're on the precipice of so much fun stuff going on, whether like the election feeling tenuous or NFL trade deadline. College football, I feel like, is just like ramping up into what's the best part of the season. So I feel like we just have so much fun stuff going on. NBA started. I feel like
Basketball started last night.
yeah, it did.
We're there,
It
baby.
Yeah. And so I feel like also with the time change that it went from like early season, like just before fall to Halloween happened, and now we're dropping straight into it. So
Yeah,
super stoked to be here. Super stoked to be chatting with you today, Jack. And we've got a lot to cover.
we do have a lot to cover. We're gonna be talking about our midseason NFL awards. We're also keeping an eye on Adam Schefter's timeline as we are recording here on the day of the trade deadline. Let's see, it's about to be 1 Central, so 2 hours from the deadline. But we're keeping an eye out. There have been a few trades that we're gonna touch on already. And who knows, we might get a little breaking news interruption if we see something else crazy happen. But yeah, we're gonna get started here with our midseason awards. It's always fun to look at the preseason, award predictions, and then midseason, and then end of season. And so we're gonna get right into this. We're gonna start with the Rookie of the Year award. So we'll start with Offensive Rookie of the Year. I mean, I feel like we don't need to talk about this one much. It's pretty much Jaden Daniels to lose right now. That's who I have, Nick. I'm pretty sure that's who you said you have as well. And I mean, stuff happens. Stuff could happen. Definitely need to mention how great of a season Malik Neighbors is having. Definitely need to mention that as long as the Cardinals keep performing well, there's always the chance that Marvin Harrison Jr. sneaks up in there. But this award is traditionally a quarterback award, just like MVP is. And of the rookie quarterbacks, Jaden Daniels is by far playing the best.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with you, Jack. Jaden Daniels deserves all the praise. He's been incredible. He's led what has been an insanely efficient offense throughout the year. They had a stretch where to start the year, they were just only scoring points on drives. They were never punting, essentially, where they were scoring more points than they had incompletions. It was just ridiculous. They were doing an amazing job. Jaden Daniels did an amazing job. Neighbors obviously deserves a shout out. Marvin Harrison, he's been good, probably below what you'd expect from a number 4 overall pick, but he's been good. And of course, I want to give a shout out to Brock Bowers as well, as a tight end playing as well as he has, producing, being a weapon on Vegas. Brock Bowers as well has been an incredibly good rookie player, especially on a bad team, being as good as he's been, being by far the number 1 weapon since Adams was traded.
Yeah. And I think actually this gives us a good place to talk about the Commanders just very briefly. I texted you yesterday because I was looking sort of at the playoff standings right now, as we're halfway through the year. And Washington is 7-2. They're number 2 in the NFC. But like I said to you, their strength of victory and their strength of schedule right now, their strength of schedule is worst in the league, and strength of victory is bottom 4 in the NFC. And coincidentally, the Eagles are second worst in the league with strength of schedule and bottom 3 in the conference as well. And so I think as we see the Commanders' schedule ramp up a little bit more, they still need to play the Eagles twice. I think they need to play the Cowboys twice as well. They need to play Pittsburgh. They need to play Atlanta. We'll see how much this stands. They're on a trajectory right now of finishing like 13-4 or something. But the hardest part of their schedule is coming up. However, I think that actually is the best case scenario for Jaden Daniels. He's really been able to play with confidence and get his feet under him before having to face some of those defenses that he otherwise hasn't really played against a good one.
Mm-hmm. I hear you with that, Jack. I feel like, though, that their schedule doesn't even harden that much, though, where, like, Steelers are good, Eagles are good, but it's like, okay, Cowboys, Dak Prescott's injured. Okay, Titans, Saints just fired their coach. It's like, okay, the Eagles and the Steelers, and then like the Falcons and Kirk Cousins. It really depends kind of which version of Kirk Cousins you get.
Right.
So I feel like the NFC East just is simultaneously not that threatening while being terrifying, depending on any given week, you know? So,
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on to defensive rookie of the year. We were talking before we started, and this one's a little bit harder than in years past. We both sort of agreed that it felt like the draft, especially the first round, was really offense centered, not as much defense centered. And so because of that, there weren't as many big names that were like, hey, these are the guys that we're looking at, that we're looking to see. It's not like a couple of years ago when Trayvon Walker and then Aiden Hutchinson were the first two picks of the draft. So it's a little harder. We're sort of picking through the weeds, it feels like a little bit. But even so, I think we both agreed on this one as well, that Jared Verse right now would be our defensive rookie of the year, the defensive lineman for the Rams. He's playing great. The Rams obviously had maybe some of the biggest shoes to fill in NFL history with the retirement of Aaron Donald. Yeah. And I mean, obviously Jared Verse is not playing at that level, not producing at that level yet, but he has shown that he is certainly a great guy to step in there and fill that role for a long time. I remember especially watching that first game of the season, the Lions-Rams game, and he was making it difficult. He was making it harder for the Lions to run than they've had since then. He was getting in the backfield, and yeah, Jared Verse is having a great year so far.
I agree with you, Jack. It feels like Jared Verse is the natural kind of pick as far as defensive rookie of the year. Edge rushers, obviously, on defense get most of the praise. Sacks, forced fumbles, pressuring the quarterback. They get a lot of the praise. And Verse right now is on pace to have 7 sacks, which for a rookie is pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
But he's also on pace for 18 tackles for loss, which is tremendous. He's been great against the run. He's been a very tough player. He's integrated perfectly into that Rams defensive line, who obviously, as you said, had huge shoes to fill. And to say they haven't missed a beat would be disingenuous, but that team hasn't looked terrible on the defensive line when Aaron Donald obviously is the most impactful defensive lineman we've probably seen in the last decade pretty easily, outside of maybe J.J. Watt. Like, you're talking about probably a surefire all-time defensive player. Like, okay, with defensive tackles, it's like Mean Joe Green, him. There aren't really any other ones that are better than them.
Yeah.
And they really were able to supplement that with taking 2 players out of Florida State who both played well, him and Fisk.
Yeah.
And Verse, I think, has played better, and especially last week did a really great job.
Yeah. And look at the Rams, man. They started off really poorly. It was seeming like, hey, they're gonna be sellers. Is it time to trade Matt Stafford and try to recoup some of that? Is it time to trade Cooper Kupp? And they've gone and won 3, maybe 4 games in a row now. I think 3. I think they've won 3 games in a row now, and it's like, hey, just like that, the Rams are back in this thing in a very, very, very weak NFC West division this year. So it'll be cool to see how they do, and especially how Verse continues to do on that defense. Moving on to comeback player of the year. I think pretty much everybody preseason was giving this to Aaron Rodgers, with the situation of tearing the Achilles 4 plays into the season with the new team and everything. But so far this year, I've got to give it to another old quarterback who tore his Achilles in Kirk Cousins. I feel like Cousins has played really, really well, has gone to a Falcons team that needed good quarterback play, and he has absolutely provided that. It took some getting used to. That first game of the year against the Steelers looked really, really rough. But he's really gotten more confident and more comfortable, moving around in the pocket and stuff like that, and trusting that repaired Achilles. And so I'm giving it to Kirk Cousins right now.
Mm-hmm. I hear you with that. I think Kirk has obviously been ramping up more and more throughout the year, But I think the guy who I'm giving it to has probably outplayed him, even though their records are different. And that I'd give it to Joe Burrow. He's just playing incredibly well, and he's had one of his receivers in and out of the lineup between Chase and Higgins. Both of them have been in and out trading spots. The defense has been terrible. Their running back in Moss was just badly injured, and they had to trade a seventh for Khalil Herbert. He's had very poor support where the offensive line isn't playing much better than it has in the past, and it's played very poorly in the past. And the defense has been awful, and they've been able to claw their way back to a reasonable record. Not a great record, but that's been purely on him throwing the ball. And I think that's been really impressive, and he's come back with force. So I give it to Joe Burrow with a very impressive set of stats and starting to ramp up here.
Totally hear that. I think if you're the Bengals, you're really hoping that this next 3-game stretch was actually the last 3 games, because you've convinced yourself now that you're potentially still contenders, and you could lose these next 3 games that you have against the Ravens, the Steelers, and the Chiefs. Maybe no, I forget. Their next 3 games are tough. To say the least.
Ravens, Chargers, Steelers.
Ravens, Chargers, Steelers, right? And so, you're if you go 1-2 or 0-3 these next 3 games, then it's like, shoot, we weren't contenders. But yeah, I think if the MVP award wasn't so predicated on your team also being really, really good, I think Joe Burrow, there's an argument for him to be at the top of near the top of the MVP argument right now. But we'll get to MVP a little later. But absolutely, he's in the conversation for comeback player of the year as well. Moving on to coach of the year, Nick, I want to hear who you have first with this one.
So I was weighing between 2 guys particularly. Coach of the year typically has been an award where it doesn't go to the best coach. It kind of goes to the coach where the team's most surprising. The team kind of above what their expectations were the most. Mm-hmm. I kind of went against the grain with my pick with that, I would say. But there were 2 guys primarily that came to mind, or 2 teams. I think the Lions obviously deserve a ton of credit, and Dan Campbell has done a really good job instilling a culture and toughness. And the other team that I was contemplating that a lot of their coaches deserve praise is Washington, obviously, with Jaden Daniels, who we spoke about. Very few people expected Washington to look like an incredible offense and a team that can contend in the NFC as far as like right away. Mm-hmm. And so those were the 2 teams that I was contemplating. But I feel like a lot of the credit with Washington actually should go to Cliff Kingsbury, who has been coaching up Jaden Daniels very well.
Yes.
And so we're not talking about it today, but there's also a sub award that's far less popular in the NFL for assistant coach of the year. I think Kingsbury definitely is in a bucket where he should be a favorite to win that award. I think him and Ben Johnson are both being very impressive as offensive minds on their own respective teams. Definitely. In this case, I think that Kingsbury kind of fits into the bucket of assistant of the year since he's been a dominant coach in his offense that he's producing this year with Jaden. But coach of the year, I think Dan Campbell deserves it in terms of like, although the Chiefs are undefeated and they just won again last night and they're 8-0, I think that the word around the street is the Lions are the best team. I think they've played the best. I think they've looked the best. I think if they had Hutchinson, they would probably be Super Bowl favorites right now out of the NFC. I think they're still Super Bowl favorites out of the NFC. I think with Hutchinson, though, that they'd feel really confident against the Chiefs. And I think that Dan Campbell is the one to deserve a bunch of the praise. I'm sure you held off not knowing whether I was going to give praise to your Lions. But I think that Dan Campbell has been very impressive this year in the culture and how he's built up this Lions team into one that can play against anybody. So I'd give it to him this year.
So that's really, really interesting because when I look at coach of the year, I also agree it's not always like this is the best coach. You know, if that were the case, then let's be honest, you know, Andy Reid, Bill Belichick, you know, they would have just won it over and over and over again. But it is a team that is surprising and plays above their expectations. Often a coach that sort of is able to make the best out of maybe a poor situation with injury, stuff like that. And so my coach of the year is actually Mike Tomlin of the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Nice.
Because I think what he's doing with that team is unbelievable. I think there's been a few times that he's deserved it in the last few years. Like the year that his quarterbacks were Ben Roethlisberger and Landry Jones and Duck Hodges and like all of those guys, and still had a winning record. I thought he deserved it then. But definitely this year, when it's not just, we're just going to get by with a winning record. But I mean, the team is 6-2. At this point, they have a firm lead right now in the AFC North. And I think that a lot of the credit has to go to him. I think solely alone, even though Justin Fields was 4-2, making the decision to switch to Russ and seeing, whoa, this Pittsburgh offense isn't just good enough to get by because of how good the defense is, but this offense under Russell Wilson is good enough to beat some teams, regardless of what the defense does. I think that alone, him making that decision, and all of us being like, why are you changing it? Things are working great. And then all of us having to like walk up with our tail between our legs and say, Mike Tomlin, we're sorry. I think he has absolutely shown that he, in my opinion, is worthy of Coach of the Year. So that's funny that we picked each other's head coaches there.
Propping each other up. Mike Tomlin, I think, has one of the most standout. So like with a lot of these awards, it's like, who had that moment as like, that was the MVP play. That was the defensive player, like winning that game. Tomlin, I think, has a moment this year of like, when he benched Fields for Russ, the reports completely out of Pittsburgh were he said he went Lone Ranger, that the reports are the entire locker room, entire ownership, the other coaches were like, why are you going with Russ over Fields? Like, let's continue with Fields. And he was the only one. He went Lone Ranger and made the call. And to see the results of that at this point, the cojones he has to be able to make that call are insane. Like that is a coaching moment, masterclass, flip a switch instance that I think is definitely award worthy. And like, what other coach has that moment of like, it was solely them. It wasn't their coordinators. It wasn't their players. That was him making a call. And so I definitely can get behind Mike Tomlin's superstar coach. And it shocked me. I wanted to keep Fields in too. I have to walk back with my tail between my legs, like you were saying.
Yeah. Also, I don't think there was enough press or enough credit given to the way Justin Fields handled that situation. Just the class and maturity that he had, like it does just really go to show, like he could have been something if Chicago hadn't just effed him up so bad. So yeah. All right, moving on to Offensive Player of the Year. Man, this one's tough. This one's really, really tough for me. The way I see it, there are two running backs that you can go either way with.
On new teams.
Very
well.
Both on new teams playing very well. For those of you that don't know who we're talking about King Henry or Saquon, the quad god, Barkley. And you know what? I gave it to Saquon Barkley. I mean, you look at this Eagles team right now, and you look at what they were at the end of last year, right? And you see that, Hurts just didn't have confidence in himself, really. Play calling was stagnant. They didn't have a great run game. And Saquon Barkley's come in and completely turned that team around, right? They have an actual threat on offense. And because of that, things are opening up for Jalen Hurts in the passing game more than we've seen. I think that the Ravens getting Derrick Henry, while Derrick Henry is playing incredible and is potentially having like the best year of his career at his age, this far into the year or into his career, Saquon is in the same boat. And you look at the Ravens last year, who were the number 1 seed in the AFC, and it was we are really good and we want to be better, and so we're going to take this. And you look at the Eagles, and it was like, listen, we need help. We need significant help. And Saquon Barkley has come in and elevated them higher than I think we expected. And so I give it to Saquon Barkley. I also think that, hear me out, you could give it to Jared Goff.
I hear you.
I don't think it's appropriate to give him the MVP. I think the conversations are appropriate, but I don't think it's appropriate to give him the MVP. But if you look at the Lions offense and how much it's predicated on him and the fact that he won't let the ball hit the ground unless there's a penalty on the play, I think there has to be a mention there. But if I'm the one voting, right, if I actually get a vote in this, I'm voting Saquon Barkley.
I hear you. I completely agree that the conversation starts and ends with those two dudes, in Saquon, in Derrick Henry. And they both have been incredible, putting up stat lines, each of them respectively at 1,900 something yards right now at midseason. That's insane. Saquon, obviously a great receiving back, hasn't put up insane receiving numbers. Derrick Henry, not a great receiving back, has put up okay receiving numbers for himself. But they have both transformed how you have to guard their respective teams. And they've both had staple moments. They have been the unguardable players on their team. When Derrick Henry busted the run against Cincinnati to basically ice that game, when he busted the run to kill the Bills on the first play, when Saquon just in this last week, he's bust a bunch of big plays. The backwards hurdle after the spin move, like we're going to be talking about that for a long while. But insane. The picture of it, you don't even have to see the video. Seeing the picture of him hurdling a dude going the same direction, it's like, wait a second, that's not how a hurdle's supposed to look. Yeah. And it's like, no, it's not, because he just did something insane, button mashing in real life.
He looked like Barry Sanders.
Yeah, he looked ridiculous, and that's Saquon for you. Definitely a gold jacket kind of ability player, even though he's been very injured. And I made my decision to cop out and do co-offensive player of the year awards, splitting it down the middle. Same archetype, 2 running backs, new teams. Great job between the two of them. Great offenses, other offensive weapons. And I think if the voters voted today, going 25 one way, 25 the other, I'd stand by them too. I think that's a perfectly legitimate way to vote. That the people who say Derrick Henry transformed how you have to guard Lamar, and the people who say, well, Saquon resurrected what was an Eagles team that was in a terrible funk, that was a disaster last year. Both are legitimate, and I think that I would want to split it right down the middle for 2 incredible players.
I hear you. Also, imagine the Eagles with a competent head coach. The decisions that Nick Sirianni made on Sunday against the Jaguars were just absolutely dreadful. And you know what? I'm sure this week he will give us more things to potentially talk about next week when it comes.
28 points on 4 touchdowns and a field goal.
It's yeah.
the stat line for scoring is crazy.
4 times he decided to go for it on 4th down instead of kicking a 40-yard field goal. But then at the end of the game is like, no, let's kick the 57-yard field goal, where if we miss, we give Trevor Lawrence fantastic field position. Mm-hmm. If it weren't for the fact that Trevor Lawrence made one of the most boneheaded decisions I feel like we've seen all year on that interception, the Jaguars might win, and Nick Sirianni might not still be a head coach in the NFL. Mm-hmm. Like, it's crazy. All right, defensive player of the year. Nick, who do you got?
I got Fred Warner. I think TJ Watt's obviously incredible. I'm a Steelers fan. I love him. I think Fred Warner is the natural pick in terms of the guys leading the league, the guys who are leading the league in sacks who normally you'd want to give it to. None of them stand out as the defensive player of the year quality players. Like, I love Trey Hendrickson. He's never been in that same tier of like a Parsons, Garrett, Bosa, Watt. He's never been that. He's very, very good. But I don't think he's a defensive player of the year caliber player. but I think he's leading in the stat category that a lot of people's eyes are at. I think that currently Fred Warner having 4 forced fumbles and 2 interceptions, just ridiculous splash playability. Him and Bosa are the ones carrying a defensive side of the ball for the 49ers that has quite struggled, but they're the only good parts about it, and they're great playmakers. And I think Fred Warner could be the first linebacker since Kuechly to really deserve and win this award. So I'm going to go with Fred Warner.
I think Fred Warner is a great choice. I think I want to make the caveat that if Aiden Hutchinson hadn't gotten hurt, he'd be running away with this thing. He hasn't played in 3 games, and he is still tied for 4th in the league in sacks. And I think he's still like top 3, if not leading in quarterback pressures, even at this point still. I mean, you could even make an argument right now to give it to him still, like at the season point. But I give it to TJ Watt. I mean, he's just been incredible. He just keeps going and being like, hey, remember how awesome last year was? Let me do it again. Let me do it again. Let me do it better. And I think it's not just the stats. Like you watch the game too. I mean, the number of stupid forced fumbles and sacks that have been called back for dumb reasons. In that game or in the games that he's playing, but like you still have to give credit where it's due to him. And I absolutely do. He has been on fire. He's playing lights out football. He is that game ender on defense. And I think part of what helps is that he is an edge rusher. I don't see Fred Warner as that game ender on defense because of his position, though he absolutely has the ability to do that sometimes. But the way that Watt just wreaks havoc is just unreal and incomparable.
Yeah. 2 weeks ago, Watt playing against the Giants, Illuminor before the game, the right tackle for the Giants, said, I want to go on an island with him. He said, I want to play Watt one-on-one. Let me at him. I'll lock him down. They gave him help 85, 90% of the game. And on the critical play of the game late in the 4th quarter, the one play they don't give him help, the running back doesn't chip Watt. He goes up the middle, and Watt makes a play. He rushes around the edge, strips Daniel Jones, hops on the fumble that he just stripped, and ends the game all on his own. And the right tackle after that, he said, he didn't have a good game. I locked him down. That's just one play. Those just one plays you let up to Watt are game-changing. Third down drive ender, forced fumble, random interception he picks off, forcing fumbles on the running back multiple times, goal line. He's just a game wrecker. He's going to be somebody who you're going to look up at the end of his career, and it's like a defensive player shouldn't have 30 minutes of highlights, and yet he will. He's ridiculous. I hear you. I think that he's going to have some big games coming up in sacks that could rocket him up into where he belongs, top of the defensive player of the year list.
Yeah. I think also we should maybe do like a compilation of like losing teams saying stupid things this year. So that there's Trayvon Diggs saying "suck on D's nuts" to the reporter when he asked like, "Hey, you gave up that touchdown," and he got pissed about it. There was I don't even remember who it was for the Packers this last week who said like, I think the team that executed the best won the game, but I don't think the best team won the game when the Lions beat them. It's like guys just be saying stupid stuff after they lose this year.
Yeah.
And,
Jerry Jones, when asked, so why didn't you like make more moves? And he's like, I'll fire you. Like Jerry just salty there. What? Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And we're gonna talk about the Cowboys here in a little bit. But last but not least, MVP. And I think there's one of the things that you just kind of like need to start with to eliminate some guys. Eliminate a guy like a Joe Burrow, even though he's having such a great year. It's like the team isn't performing. That's a significant part of it, and that's part of it in most sports. Like I remember when Russell Westbrook won the MVP when he was averaging a triple-double, it was still like, well, should he deserve it? Like the Thunder are the 6th best team in the West. It's like absolutely he should, but those questions come up. And so when I look at the teams that are at the top, of the league right now. You have the Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes is not playing like an MVP right now. They're winning, and they're winning on the back of that defense, but he is not playing like an MVP. You look at the Lions, and Jared Goff is playing great, and I would love to give it to him, but it's there are other people that deserve it a little bit more. So the guy that I am giving it to right now is actually Josh Allen. I feel like Josh Allen really, really deserves it right now. He's playing great football. The biggest issue with him in the past has been the turnovers, and I think he only has one interception so far this year, and maybe just a couple fumbles lost. But like he's really taking care of the football. The Bills are playing really, really well. They remind me, honestly, not in terms of play, but just in terms of what their season is going to look like. They remind me a lot of the Lions last year. I think they're going to end up at like 12-5. They had a great start and then played the Ravens and just got absolutely buzzsawed by them. I think there's some similarities there. They'll probably be like maybe a couple letdown games, but also win some games against some really good opponents too. But Josh Allen is playing, I think, better football than he has in his entire career. The Bills are playing well, and because of that, I got to give it to him right now.
Mm-hmm. I hear you. Josh Allen, I think, is a great option. I think he definitely will win an MVP at some point in his career. I think he's that caliber of player. I think Mahomes and Lamar obviously have gobbled up a ton of MVPs during his prime thus far. My issue thus far with Josh Allen, though, has been that he's an offense all unto his own, but I feel like the offense when he's running it hasn't reached that like 07 Patriots, like you can't guard us level of offense. I feel like it's a lot of backyard football to me, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I feel like the level of efficiency of offense right now of the just pure touchdowns scored and everything for the guy who I will give the MVP to, again, back to back now, Lamar Jackson. I think that it's incredibly difficult to win an MVP. It's incredibly difficult to win two of them. It's insanely difficult to win three and two of them back to back. But Lamar, I feel like he checks the most boxes that an MVP has to check, where he's the best player on his team. His stats reflect looking like probably the best quarterback in the league with a ton of touchdown passes, very few turnovers, rushing the ball incredibly well. He's had multiple games, perfect passer rating, 5 touchdown game here. Obviously, he has Derrick Henry, who's incredibly good and an award winner all in of himself. But I feel like Lamar and Derrick Henry are an unguardable offense that, like, it makes sense to give the MVP award there, considering I just don't know how you guard that offense. I don't know how you guard. You could hand it off one way. He could keep it the other way. He can throw it and dime up a defense. I just think it's a headache for defenses, and I think Lamar is the key to that. And I just think he deserves the award with his completion percentage. He beat Josh Allen, blew the doors off of him. They lost to the Browns, but he's had the most moments.
And the Raiders.
And the Raiders. The play 2 weeks ago, I think, where he was running around for 15 seconds to throw a strike in the back of the end zone, cue the circus music, like ridiculous. You have plays like that. You have plays where he's ripping off huge runs. You have games where he doesn't throw any incompletions. You have games where he throws 5 touchdowns. He just does it all. He's incredible. He's Lamar Jackson. It annoys me because he doesn't play that well against the Steelers, and so I don't get to see that angle of Lamar Jackson, which I'm happy about. But it's Lamar against the Steelers is not Lamar against some of these other teams. But to be able to beat the Bills, to be able to beat the Bengals in overtime, Lamar's incredible. He deserves so much credit.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's not the wrong pick, right? Like, but I value the way that the Bills have been winning compared to the Ravens. And also, like, I think you said that Lamar is the best player on his team, and I don't know. Like Derrick Henry might be the best player on that team. Especially like here's the thing. When you look at the running backs across the NFL, Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley are at the top for sure. And depending on who you ask, they're interchangeable. If you ask me right now, I mean, I gave the offensive player of the year to Saquon Barkley, but
Right.
they're up there. You look at the quarterbacks in the NFL, and even still right now, like I think there are a few other guys that are up there in that upper echelon with Lamar Jackson. And so I don't like Lamar Jackson. I always admit to that, but I respect and appreciate what he can do on the football field. But right now I'm loving Josh Allen. I feel like he deserves some love. And especially as it feels like no one is talking about him right now. So, but it'll be interesting to see the way these things kind of go. By the way, you mentioned perfect passer rating. I do not understand how the game that Jared Goff went 18 for 18 for 2 touchdowns and I think it was like 270 yards or something. Like that wasn't a perfect passer rating. I'm like,
Not wow.
no, it was like 155.8 instead of 158.3. I'm like, if that's not a perfect passer rating, then like anyway, that statistics tell stories, but statistics also tell a story that you want when you make them tell that story. So, moving on, let's do our little trade check-in. Shefty hasn't posted anything new. I'm not sure if you're seeing anything. But all right. So before we get into talking about, there are 3 trades that two trades that we really want to talk about. One that if we've got time, we're going to talk about. But before we do that, Nick, it is time. We've been putting it off. We haven't brought it up, but it is time for us to finally just like let the floodgates open on the Dallas freaking Cowboys, man. I mean, like you've got to be kidding me. There couldn't possibly be a worse run franchise right now in the NFL that acts like they have such high hopes, right? Like the Raiders are terribly run, the Panthers are terribly run, but both of them, their GM and owner isn't saying, well, we're competing for a Super Bowl this year, right? Like, and this thing with the Cowboys, it dates all the way back to the summer. They don't sign anybody. They don't sign anybody. Jerry tries to be really cool and steal opening day headlines by we're going to pay Dak and CD. And it's like, cool, but no one really cares, right? Like we knew that was going to happen. Absolutely pigeonholed them for this season. They don't get a running back that they desperately need. They get what would be the most electric running back duo in NFL history if it were 2017 with Dalvin Cook and Ezekiel Elliott. But now they're both washed and aren't good. Dalvin Cook has only played in 2 games this year. Like just absolutely terrible. When asked why you didn't get Derrick Henry, he said he didn't fit what we were trying to do. He said, I don't think he'd be having as good a year as he's having with Baltimore if he was with us. And it's like, you know what, Jerry? If he wouldn't be fitting what you're trying to do, then change what you're trying to do. Like, it's the same thing when people are like, well, does Myles Garrett, fit the Detroit Lions culture? And it's like, if he doesn't, then maybe we should change the culture a little bit, right? Like, when people were talking about edge rushers for the Lions to get. And so all of this happens. Jerry continues to say, no, we're good. We're really good. We're competing. We're trying, we're doing everything we can to make this roster better is what he says on Sunday. He said, like, rest assured, if there's something we can do to make this roster better, before the trade deadline, we're going to do it. That's after Dak gets hurts his hamstring. We found out today he's going on IR. He'll be out at least 4 games. And then on the sideline, if you can read lips, he says, we blanking suck. Like, then Jerry says all of that. And so we're like, all right, Jerry, like, let's see it. What are you going to do? And he goes out and he trades for Jonathan Mingo, a wide receiver at Carolina who hasn't done anything, who is going to come in and basically be your 5th best wide receiver behind CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks, Tolbert, and Turpin. And it's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? You should You should be selling. Everybody agrees you should be selling, but you're like, no, we're going to be buying. You're not willing to admit, hey, I made a mistake this offseason. And so you have to try and make it look better, which you're not going to be able to pull off, but you keep trying. And you decide that the best thing to do to make this look better is to go and trade for a wide receiver who's going to give you depth at the wide receiver position when your offensive line barely has 5 guys that are NFL caliber starting at the offensive line, when you don't actually have a real linebacker right now or a real pass rush, when your DBs that are supposed to be so good in Deron Bland and Trayvon Diggs are getting smoked by receivers every week. Like, it's so bad, so dysfunctional.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely get behind everything you have to say. The Cowboys are not a well-run team, but the issue is they're convinced that they are a well-run team. They're convinced they are contenders every year, and they make moves according to something that's not true. And a big issue with this is what happened last year. The story kind of starts and ends with a lot of Jerry Jones decision-making, and last year they traded a 4th-round pick for Trey Lance. 4th-round pick, pretty innocuous. Trey Lance has done nothing in his career, did nothing for the Niners, been injured, and they were bidding against no one. No one else was gonna offer a 4th-round pick or anything like that, and they gave up that 4th-round pick. Then, end of the season comes, they lose in a blowout to Green Bay. They lose to a blowout to Green Bay. Okay, it happens. You're the favorite. You're at home. You decide to keep Mike McCarthy. That's your decision. More power to you. That 4th-round pick you traded for Trey Lance, that 4th-round pick, the draft comes along. You need a running back because you don't sign Tony Pollard. 4th-round pick, that could have been used on Braylon Allen, Audric Estime, Garendo, who the Niners have. Lots of dudes who can be productive. The Cowboys, their running game has been awful. If they had that 4th-round pick to be able to use on that running back, they could have done something. They decided to make no pick for a running back in the whole draft, and the running back who they most favor, Jerry Jones, went live on radio and said, oh yeah, that kid Brooks out of Texas, we like him. And then Carolina trades up to snatch him in front of you in the 2nd round. That is malpractice of ownership. That is trying to steal the headlines when you're actually losing out on any sort of strategy, any sort of benefit you have, any surprise that you could pull one over on anybody else. You're giving all that up. And in the offseason last year, he says, we're going all in. We're going to make moves to go all in. No Tyron Smith. Their center that they had, Biotish, went to Washington. He's gone. They don't have him anymore. Have to rebuild the whole offensive line from scratch via the draft, essentially. And the reason that they couldn't use any of those picks on running back because their offensive line would have been so awful was because they let offensive linemen walk in Tyron Smith, in Biotish. And so you are forced to draft offensive line, which is fine. You can draft offensive line, but that means you can't draft running back. But why did you need running back? Because you didn't sign Tony Pollard, because you franchise tagged him, didn't sign him to a long-term deal when he had broken his leg. Why do you do that? You're the general manager, your ownership, Jerry Jones. Why are you making these decisions? And then all the way up to now, they've had a season from hell. So much of their defensive line, edge rusher, has been injured. Dak Prescott now injured. Running back room has been a mess. And we know now today Dak Prescott's going on IR. And what do? They don't reinforce the edge rusher position where they should have a month ago after all these injuries. They say we need a receiver from Carolina who's done nothing. We're going to overpay for him. And we're going to do this knowing that Dak Prescott's out a month at least. And on top of that, our season's already smoked. So even if we were 6-3 and Dak Prescott was out 4 weeks, we had a shot to make the playoffs. Without Dak Prescott, zero shot. And above that, Trey Lance, who they traded a 4th-round pick for, they're not even going to play him. They're going to play Cooper Rush. It makes zero sense. And all of that, Mike McCarthy's still there when he should have been fired a year ago.
Right.
And so it's just absolute dysfunctional malpractice of ownership, malpractice of GMing. And Dak Prescott decided to re-sign with them before the season for a huge bag. I don't know what else to say. The Cowboys are a mess, and they're just clickbait. They are the clickbait of the NFL. No substance, just wanting you to look at them, just wanting somebody to find them interesting. And the only thing interesting about them is that they are a train wreck. They are a dumpster fire. They are everything that you want in a team, the opposite way, and that they're everything interesting because they're bad. You're going to watch them get ran through the offense, the defensive line going to get ran through the middle. The offense going to be unwatchable, and nobody's going to want to see a thing. And Jerry Jones is going to keep saying, we're going all in. Watch us. We're going to do everything we can. And it's a bold-faced lie.
It's so bad. I mean, like the problem that they're in right now is Jerry Jones is so full of himself and so egotistical that for them to actually get better, he needs to admit that he has made a wrong decision. And he will never do that. That's the problem. He needs to just finally admit we should have signed Derrick Henry or tried to sign Saquon Barkley this offseason. Okay, so I messed up there. He should also admit I messed up in not getting a deal done for Dak and CeeDee Lamb sooner, because then his other thing is like, oh, well, we didn't have the money to pay Derrick Henry. It's like, well, you did because you actually hadn't signed CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott yet. Or if you had signed them, you would have known how much money you had, right? So there's just so many mistakes that he has made, so many big, so many small, all of them linked together to put them in this awful, terrible situation that they're in right now. And he isn't willing to, one, just flat out say, I made mistakes and I'm trying to fix them, or two, actually do things to fix the mistakes that he's made, whether he's willing to admit he's made mistakes or not. And so you're going to have a situation where they have the highest paid quarterback in the NFL. They have the second highest paid wide receiver in the NFL. And if they sign Micah Parsons, he's probably going to want to be the highest paid defensive player in the NFL. And so you're going to have those three pieces, which, by the way, all of them are important pieces to be a successful football team. Don't get me wrong. You need to have a franchise quarterback. You need to have a franchise wide receiver. You need to have a cornerstone defensive guy. But you are going to have so much money invested in that you are literally going to be fielding a practice squad at all of the other positions on your team. And you're going to keep coming back and saying, no, we're a competitive team. No, we're a competitive team. No, we're a competitive team. Jerry Jones, no, you are not. No, you are not. You care more about just being in the spotlight than actually winning. It doesn't matter what you say. Your actions are speaking louder. And so you're doing everything you can to be in the spotlight. I guarantee you, even though the trade deadline is an hour and a half from now as we're speaking, that next week when the Cowboys lose and they keep losing, he's going to keep saying, hey, we're all in and all of this stuff. And it's like, Jerry, what does that even mean? There's nothing else you can do at this point. What you have is what you have. And what you have is garbage. It is garbage. If he were smart, I know this sounds crazy, but if he were smart, he would be trying to get a king's ransom for Micah Parsons right now in the next hour and a half. Because then at least you're setting yourself up for success in the future, because you can and should get 3 first-round picks for him, right? And then you're at least like, okay, we've got high-value picks, and they're high-value picks because they're first-round picks, but also because then you'll have guys on first-round pick rookie contracts for a while that you can actually sift through, figure out what's good, what's not. And you and I have talked about the Cowboys in general draft really, really well. And so put some stock in that. It's just so frustrating. And it's so frustrating that because they're the Cowboys, because they're America's team and everyone's fans of them, that we have to see them talked about on Get Up and First Take every single day when they aren't worth it. Like, it is a waste of time to hear them get talked about. It is a waste of time to talk about them. That's why we've put off talking about them until this point. That's why we're talking about them right now, and then we probably won't talk about them again until the offseason.
Right. The other thing about malpractice that they've done is that they waited to pay CD that he held out through all of camp. And so you lost all of that time with him and Dak to build back their chemistry. And so just that on top of everything else. All of that being said, Mingo as a player, I liked him out of college, out of Ole Miss, who they traded for from the Panthers. but it was an overpay at the wrong time and didn't make sense. And so even though I like the asset, overpaying for an asset and paying at the wrong time for the wrong value, it's still a bad move, although I like the asset. So
Yeah, overpaying for a guy that doesn't actually help you and fill your needs is never the right call. Like, especially again, and like I said to you when we texted, like I think he could be a solid receiver. I think right now, as it stands, he is the fifth best receiver on that team. And it's not like you went and made a deal for a guy like a Mike Williams and Amari Cooper that's actually going to be up near the top and is going to punch some of those guys down a little bit. So like at least, hey, you know what? We're getting another receiver. We have receivers, but now our wide receiver 2 is better. Now our wide receiver 3 is better, and working that way down. It's just, yeah. So, all right. Well, we did it. We talked about the Cowboys. We've got a little bit of time left. There are a couple big trades that have happened today. Let's start with Marshawn Lattimore to the Commanders. Big move. It goes to show that the Commanders, and I love that they're doing this. It reminds me a lot of the Texans last year, and especially this offseason, where it's like, listen, we're ahead of schedule, but instead of being content with being ahead of schedule, it's like, fine, let's go compete right now. They make a deal for Marshawn Lattimore, who is dealing with a hamstring injury, but I mean, when he comes back, he is one of the best. Definitely helps bolster a Commanders defense that has been playing good enough that Jaden Daniels has been able to elevate the team. But when, like we talked about, the hardest part of their schedule coming up, and then especially when we're in January in the playoffs, you're going to need more help than that. They are giving up a third, a fourth, and a sixth to get Lattimore and a fifth in return. Nick, how do you feel about this deal?
I feel like it's a solid deal for both ends. I think that now is a good time to move off of Lattimore for the Saints. And I think that if I remember, his contract value the next 2 years is pretty high for base salary. So that will kind of limit in terms of like contenders taking on that salary will be more difficult. But a team with a rookie quarterback can absorb that contract hit pretty easily. And I think this is a good return for the Saints, who moving off Lattimore because, as we've talked about, as we've seen for the last several years, the Saints books as far as cap and cash is awful, atrocious, has been terrible for years. And so ideally, with them firing Dennis Allen yesterday, as well as starting potentially that cleaning of house, I think it could work for the Saints' benefit long term. Maybe get them back on a path of be able to draft and build around a QB and kind of build up a team around him. Because it feels like they've been trying to hold on to the players in the era of Drew Brees from 2017, 18, 19, 20. And it feels like that's kind of passed them by, and they've just kind of been trying to struggle to be good rather than be bad than be great. And so I think now is the time to move for the Saints. So I think that they deserve a good grade for it. And I think Washington can legitimately do like a Green Bay or a Texans last year and win a playoff game right now. And I think that that puts them at a good spot in their schedule. So I think that it's good for them too.
Yeah, I agree. I think there are other guys on the Saints that the Saints should potentially look to move. We'll see if they do or not. Breaking news from Adam Schefter: the Packers are trading edge rusher Preston Smith to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Specifics have not been announced yet of what the Steelers are sending back, but that was posted 2 minutes ago by Adam Schefter. Nick, as our resident Steelers fan, how do you feel about that?
That is very interesting. I think that the Steelers' edge rush position is obviously very good with TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith, and Nick Herbig's also very good. But to me, that indicates that I'm kind of worried. Herbig's been on IR for the last 3 or so weeks, and that could indicate that the injury for him is worse than we originally thought. But I think that means that the Steelers are loading up to try and get it, got it, go, and like try and make a run here. I don't think edge was necessarily a spot of need. I think the trade for Mike Williams that they already made today is a really good trade that made a lot of sense for them. This one I think makes less sense, but it could make a lot more sense once we have some more context. Sure. So I'd be excited about it. Preston Smith has been good. He's done a good job on the Packers for a number of years and with Washington before that. But I'm curious kind of what this indicates about how the Steelers are trying to operate. If they're trying to run more edge rushers around to get TJ Watt a little bit more of a breather,
Right.
or Alex Highsmith more of a breather. Because as of now, like TJ Watt for his whole career has basically been run through a wall, stay on the field the whole game, like exhausted at the end of the game because he played 99% of the snaps. And so maybe this could be looking at the Steelers kind of trying to balance out his workload and get more efficiency out of their edge rushers rather than just splash.
Sure. So you mentioned the Mike Williams trade. That happened earlier today as well. Mike Williams gets traded to the Steelers for a fifth. When we first talked about it, you thought that was a little bit of an overpay. There's chance that as more details come in, maybe it's a fifth and they get Mike Williams in a seventh or something like that. We haven't heard, but the Steelers needed a receiver. There was a deal in place for Christian Kirk, and then the Jaguars were like, okay, well, we'll take care of that, but also we're going to let him play. And oh shoot, he broke his collarbone. And so, though that was going to be a deal that gets done for the Steelers, it didn't. So they move on. They go get Mike Williams. Before I let you talk about it, in my opinion, I feel like this is a really good deal for the Steelers. I feel like Mike Williams has been dogged a lot this year because the connection between him and Aaron Rodgers just didn't really happen. But I blame most of that on the Jets just being the Jets and their offensive line being bad. Rodgers on the interception in London against the Vikings, like Rodgers was like trying to pin that on Mike Williams, and it was like, Aaron, you threw a terrible pass. Like that wasn't on him. So I like this move. I think that he'll garner a little bit more attention, which will give George Pickens some more room and Van Jefferson some more room. So I really like this move for the Steelers. Even if it is an overpay, I think it's kind of an important overpay because the Steelers were in a position that, like, listen, they made the move to Russ, like we talked about earlier, and it's working, but it's you got to bolster that wide receiver room.
I hear you. I think that for me, I feel like he fits the archetype of what Cortland Sutton was for Russ last year when he was throwing a bunch of touchdowns, not very efficient in terms of long throws and many catches, but that kind of big body, deeper threat, doesn't get a lot of separation, but very strong jump ball ability. I hope that Mike Williams can kind of fill the void of like a T. Higgins type of role, a Cortland Sutton type of role. And ideally, he'll be able to soup up more as he gets further away from his ACL tear he had last year. I do feel like it was a slight overpay, but to get a big body receiver who hopefully could help George Pickens develop in terms of leadership, responsibility, route running, being a professional, and really getting another body in the room. The Steelers were really lacking in terms of bodies at the receiver position because there's Pickens, there's Jefferson, Calvin Austin. But our receiver, Roman Wilson, who we drafted in the third round, was injured preseason as well as was injured when he came back. And so I don't believe he ever suited up for the Steelers this year and is going to be out the rest of the year. So even reinforcements that were expected aren't coming back. And so they were pretty thin at the position. And so to get another body in there who's a serviceable NFL caliber receiver, hopefully can be more than that. And ideally, it should be able to add something to the offense. I'm a little bit hesitant since he's older and injured at this point in his career as far as last year. But I feel like it's only optimism for me in terms of like my expectations are low, so it should be easy for him to surpass them.
Sure. Yeah. I think once Roman Wilson comes back, he's going to be a great piece for the Steelers. I liked what he did in Michigan. Last trade here to talk about, and we'll make it brief because we talked about the Lions and their pass rushing situation a couple times already. But the deal does get done for Zadarius Smith out of Cleveland. Obviously, I said that my most ideal situation for them is to get Max Crosby. The Raiders were not willing to budge. They came out and said they're not trading him, but they're willing to trade Jacoby Myers. I thought maybe the Steelers might actually reach out about that. But anyway, the Lions trade for Zadarius Smith. I really like this move because, one, you look at the Lions pass rush without Hutch. And honestly, their pass rush isn't terrible. It's just they're just not finishing, right? They're just not getting to the quarterback. There were a few times on Sunday that they made Jordan Love move around a little bit, and you could tell that it affected him because he was playing on an injured hamstring. The pick six to Kirby Joseph, that came because the pass rush got to Jordan Love. And so I totally hear you that Zadarius Smith, because you've said this a lot, that Zadarius Smith is going from a situation where he's playing on the other side of Myles Garrett, so he's not garnering as much attention, to now he is going to be the top of the scouting report. But even still, I feel like he is enough of a presence that it's just going to help everything else work out a little bit better all around. Might free up James Houston a little bit, might free up Aleem McNeil a little bit more. And so I think that that's going to be a good move. And I also like that Zadarius Smith does have the rest of this year and then one more year on his contract. And so, yes, this is sort of a patch fix for now without Hutch, but I really like the way that this could look next year once Hutch is back and he's then getting to be more into the role like he was on the Browns so far this year, where he had 5 sacks on the season so far, and was having a productive year. So I am excited about this move. We'll see if the Lions do anything else. I don't really think that they will. Maybe they try to get another edge rusher too, just to help out. I'd be interested to see them call the Saints about Chase Young. See what they can do there. But regardless, the Lions finally they get the deal done. They get the edge rusher. And I think this though it is a smaller move than say getting a Max Crosby, I think that this takes them from, hey, they're the best team in the NFC, but they've got this real big weakness in their pass rush that could really hinder them, especially when they get to the playoffs, to, okay, they're a well-rounded team now. They have some places where they aren't, at the top of the league in certain positions, but they don't have that really, really obvious, this is a really weak link that we can exploit, that they had before this deal got done.
Yeah, I hear you there. Giving it a little bit more thought, I feel that Zadarius Smith could really slide into that role of Frank Clark on the Chiefs, where Frank Clark during the Chiefs dynasty run thus far, it was like Chris Jones is clearly the best player on that defense and on that defensive line. But Frank Clark got a bunch of sacks in the playoffs and made a bunch of key third down, sack, end the game type of plays. And I think that Aleem McNeil is playing very well. He was signed to an extension this year during the season. That Zadarius Smith could kind of be that role of like a really quite good edge rusher, clearly not a superstar or great, but that dude who ends games for the Lions, who is their clutch edge rush presence, not a superstar by any means, but really just that guy who comes into work, makes a play, as that little bit extra that you need to be able to put you over the top in those situations. And so I think that he can do a really good job of that. And I think that he was added for a really good price. I think that a 5th and a 6th is really good value for him. Sure. And I think that the Browns should definitely, in the next hour or so, just try and sell off every piece that they got in terms of moving forward, trying to get every little bit of value they can. Just because the Browns, with Deshaun Watson still under contract, it feels like that anchor for that team. They should be building more for the far future rather than the soon future.
Yep.
So I try to be moving assets further out, I would say, sadly for them. Happy for me, sadly for them.
Yeah. I mean, we had that magic when Jameis beat the Ravens, but then we also saw Tampa Bay Jameis on Sunday throwing for 1 touchdown and 3 interceptions. So, that's sort of I saw a post and I thought it was so funny that it was like, a team should sign Andy Dalton, Jameis Winston, Gardner Minshew, who else? There were a few other like backup quarterbacks.
Just rotate them.
Constantly bounce around. Yeah. And basically treat it like when in Major League Baseball, when there's a bullpen game where instead of having a starting pitcher, it's just, hey, we're just all of our bullpen pitchers will each get a couple innings. and do that. I think it was like the Browns or the Colts should do this. Joe Flacco was another one,
Whoa.
But yeah, but I agree with you that
Right.
the Browns need to be trying to sell a little bit. And yeah, calling NFC teams, obviously, because you don't want to be trading what you have within the conference if you can avoid it. But teams, I mean, heck, like as a Lions fan, like I'd hear what they would want for like a Greg Newsome, or some other guys that they've got on their defense and their offense too. So, well, let me just do one more refresh here, see if anything else has been posted. Shefty has not posted anything else when it comes to NFL trade stuff. I don't know, Nick, are you seeing something right now?
Just one more little thing about the Preston Smith trade. Reports are the Steelers only gave up a seventh, which a seventh for Preston Smith. I'm like, okay, a seventh for Smith, a fifth for Mike Williams. I guess overpay a little on Williams, underpay on Smith, so it balances out, I guess.
Yeah.
But one more thought that I had that I wanted to get your take. So the Packers got smacked last week to the Vikings, was it? Or the Lions they lost to?
The Lions beat them on Sunday.
The Lions smacked them on Sunday.
Yeah, and that game, Dan Orlovsky on Monday was saying that the game was closer than the score reflected. I think the game was farther away than the score reflected, in my opinion. But
it depends on how you look at it, considering the bad pick six Jordan Love threw on that screen pass. Right. Like, sure, you can be like, well, that made the score inflated. But the Lions also took their foot off the gas in the second half to a degree because they were up by 2 scores. And so they really didn't need to worry. But I'm just curious what this trade for Smith kind of reflects on where the Packers are at. Because I think many of us will be like, oh, the Packers, they're contenders. They're like, they did a great job last year and Jordan Love should continue to get better. But like, now I'm kind of wondering where our head's at in terms of like, where do the Packers think they're at? Because that would kind of concern me in terms of, are the Packers losing faith in their window this year? Or is Jordan's injury worse than we think as far as his calf?
Right. Like that's what I'm thinking is Jordan Love in worse shape than we thought, because there's a difference between playing through an injury when you are playing inside. If this game was at Detroit and you're playing through that injury, that's one thing, but you played outside in Lambeau in the freezing cold and the rain, and that'll make those muscle injuries worse than otherwise. So so I'm concerned that we might find out that Jordan Love is going to be out for a little bit. But even still, no, now that I think about it, like Malik Willis was playing well enough with that team to win games. So like, even if Jordan Love, let's say we were to find out he's going on the IR and he's out for 4 weeks, like, okay, Malik Willis was playing good enough that I still think they could win 2 out of their next 4 or 3 out of their next 4 and still be competing for maybe the division, but at least a wild card spot in the NFC. So that is interesting. I wonder what we'll find out about that move as more of the details get announced. So,
yes.
Well, everybody, thanks so much for joining us. This has been fun. The trade deadline is in an hour and 10 minutes. If anything crazy happens, maybe you might be hearing a little bit tagged on to the end of this episode because we hop on to talk about it. But otherwise, enjoy your weeks. Enjoy football this week, man. We are nearing the end. We're nearing the end of the college football season. Most teams, pretty much everybody only has 3 or 4 games left, which is just crazy that we're this far into it already. The NFL, man, we're in the grind and the ramp up to the playoffs at this point. And there's still a lot of games to be played. And on top of that, the NBA has started. So is college basketball. We will talk basketball here soon. We promise. But yeah, thank you everybody so much for watching, for supporting us, and have a great rest of your week.
Peace.